Hey everyone, it's Mark, your firefighter, realtor, and out-of-state investor. Today I have an amazing guest on, Amanda Hahn from Keystone CPA, and she's a tax strategist, a real estate investor, an author, a mother, a wife, and a foodie. So welcome to my channel, Amanda.
Yes, thanks so much for having me, Mark. I'm excited to dive into taxes and the foodie
Yes,
aspects with you
yes.
too.
Yeah, we were kind of talking a little bit off camera, and we were kind of joking about
Mm.
how, purchasing your investment properties is kind of the easy part once you get your systems in place. And then after that, figuring out how to manage it and all the tax implications. And that's where things start get challenging. That's why it's great to reach out to a tax strategist and whatnot. So why don't you start off by kind of telling my audience a little bit about yourself, maybe your portfolio and your backstory?
Yeah, what I always tell people is that I'm a CPA by day and real estate investor by night. So, um, like many people in our audience, I also still have a day job. My day job just happens to be running my company, and then my husband and I have invested in real estate for, gosh, over a decade now. And what's really interesting is that we were both CPAs for real estate investors when we used to work in one of the big four public accounting firms, but we never thought to do real estate ourselves. We thought it was kind of crazy. Like, why would we invest in real estate? It's only like super rich people do that. Like our clients did it. And then until we read Robert Kiyosaki's book, Rich Dad Poor Dad, was the first time my husband actually said we should invest in real estate. And I thought he was probably crazy, like lost his mind. And it was funny that you said, buying real estate is the easy part, and then, the rest of it is much harder. I think although that's true for the most part, buying the first property for us was also very difficult, just having that confidence, I guess, to say, hey, this is something I can do, that, I can build wealth through real estate. But it certainly gets easier after that.
Yeah. So, see, like you said, you mentioned seeing your clients investing in real estate. Did you kind of pick their brains, or did you kind of lean on them as far as information and how to get started?
It's really interesting. So, at the time, we were both working for Big Four public accounting, and those are like, the large international firms. And so our clients were like the big developers, the really large, almost mostly institutional investors. So, you just don't have that kind of relationship with larger clients like that, where you're like picking their brain and talking about your personal stuff. So not really, we learned about real estate investing like many people in our audience, going to regular, meetups locally, going to conferences, taking courses. That's sort of how we cut our teeth on learning on the investment side. But what's also really interesting is because we started going to local real estate meetups and started meeting everyday investors like ourselves, that was when we realized that not everybody was provided tax strategies like some of the wealthy clients that we were working with in the big firms. And so that was sort of what prompted us to start our own firm, Keystone CPA, where we just thought, we want to bring some of those, really like high-end elaborate strategies to the everyday investors in a more simplified version. Like we don't all need very complex structures and complex way to do things. There's certainly easier way to do things so that we could still get similar tax benefits.
So is your kind of niche specifically real estate investors? Is that kind of your clientele?
Yeah, I mean, so I would say probably over 90% of our clients are real estate investors. I mean, in fact, probably 100% of people who come to us are because of real estate. But our clientele is a pretty wide range from a newbie investor. So it could be, firefighter who's starting out real estate investing, or a doctor who says, hey, I want to build wealth in real estate. And how do I use that to save on taxes? All the way up to people who do real estate full time and running large, apartment, multifamily syndication. So kind of the whole gamut and everything in between that. But yes, mainly real estate expertise is what people come to us for.
Do a lot of people, when they come to you, are their taxes kind of in order? Like, have they been investing for years, or is it kind of they come to you and now like they realize like, man, I've been doing a lot of things wrong, or I haven't really figured out this tax side of things?
I think we see a little bit of both. There certainly are clients who come to us with a pretty good size portfolio and they've done things pretty well. And we're just looking for, how can we make those even better? And unfortunately, I do have a pretty large handful of clients who come to us that are a mess, for the lack of a better term. You're trying to figure out like what happened and trying to unwind it. And actually, right before meeting up with you, I was talking to a new client, and I think it was maybe like 15 minutes into the conversation, they realized like, wow, it was really a mess. Like my entities and how the money was moving. And so I said, so basically what you're telling me is not what you actually did. And that's also not how the return is filed, right? So we do see things like that. And I think that's why it's really important, even for newer investors or newbie investors, just to make sure that you're setting things up correctly, because there are always times where if you set things up wrong, it becomes very costly and sometimes impossible to make some of those corrections down the road.
Yes, that's definitely how I feel. I started, and then I started doing, asset protection and all these other things. And, I never really took into account like transfer title fees and whatnot. So like a lot of my properties are in individual LLCs, but if I was to try and switch things over or put them in one LLC, I'd have to pay all these fees. But what interested me too about some of your social media things, you kind of talked about how, and I fell for this too, is I kind of just took my documents, my tax paperwork to a tax, person, and I just expected them to figure out what I wanted done. But you talked about how your tax strategist should be kind of working for you, and there should be certain questions that you're asking them. So can you kind of touch on that a little bit?
And I think, we all do tax return filing, like you said, right? You just kind of take your paperwork and you bring it to them. You say, hey, please help me save taxes on last year. When the reality is, we all know we can't change the facts from what already happened last year or what didn't happen last year. And so it's really important to understand that when we talk about tax savings, it really stems from proactive tax planning. Proactive tax planning kind of sounds maybe a little bit scary, but really what it boils down to is just having that line of communication open with your tax advisor during the year, so that you're kind of getting their guidance and input before you pull the trigger on specific transactions. So when we talk about real estate, it's buying new properties, selling existing properties, refinancing, right? How am I going to tap into my equity in my properties? Maybe if you're switching jobs or you're getting married. So those are just, kind of major life decisions where it could become a tax saving opportunity, or it could be a tax pitfall that you're trying to avoid. So when we talk about tax planning, it doesn't really mean like, Mark, you have to become a CPA or, read a bunch of books and understand all the strategies and depreciation. No, we just mean that you have someone on your team who's well-versed in real estate, and you can talk to them to give them an update and get guidance on, okay, here are the things that I should be looking at during the year, so you're doing those right things.
That's a great point. Like, kind of, it should be done year round, right? Like, you shouldn't just be waiting to when tax season comes up, and that's when you bring your paperwork and then you start talking to your tax strategist. It kind of should be something that you're planning for the whole year.
Yeah, and I think again, it's probably a lot simpler than what many people are thinking. But typically, if you're just like everyday investor, maybe twice a year would be more than sufficient, right? Kind of meet early in the year, set up what you think you should be doing this year, and then sometime during the year, kind of get an update and tweak things if your investment plans have changed. That's pretty much it. It doesn't mean you have to talk to them all the time. A monthly meeting. But for other investors who are very, very active in real estate, we do have cases where we're talking to the same client a couple times a week if they have a deal that they're trying to close and there's decisions to be made, right? So it just kind of depends on how involved that investor is in terms of real estate transactions and what else they have going on too.
So do you see any other asset class that provides the same tax benefits that real estate does?
Um, it's a difficult question for me to answer because our focus is on real estate. And so, real estate is sort of our preferred investment vehicle. So we always lead with, hey, real estate is great because you have cash flow and appreciation and tax savings. But other similar benefits, investing in businesses, right? If you're a business owner, if you're starting out in your business, whether it's just a new business idea you've started or you're investing in like a franchise or something, there are similar tax benefits in that you can have business deductions, right? You can start to shift some of your personal expenses into legitimate business write-offs if they're being used for business. And there's also depreciation benefits too. Like if you have a business and you're buying equipment and furnishing and all that, it is similar benefits to rental real estate. But real estate is one of those asset classes where the use of leverage is more common than not. And so it's the combination of being able to use borrowed money to grow our wealth and the tax savings associated that really makes real estate such a powerful investment vehicle, right? Compared to other asset classes.
I love that. The other thing I hear a lot on social media and people, and I can't really get a clear answer for it, but a lot of people talk about they want to start an LLC for the tax benefits. Does having an LLC actually provide you any more benefits instead of just owning real estate in your personal name?
Purely from a tax perspective, if we're talking about someone, who just owns rental real estate, right? We ignore like flippers and wholesalers. If we're just talking about rental real estate, the vast majority, if not all, of the expenses that you can take are going to be exactly the same, regardless of whether you have an LLC in your personal name or in some other kind of entity. And so I hate hearing people say like on social media, like I formed an LLC and I got so much in tax write-offs. And that's not true because the write-offs that we're typically talking about with respect to rental real estate, mortgage, taxes, insurance, management fees, and maybe some of these personal things too, like a car and a home office. All those are tax deductible against your rental income if they're used for your real estate. So you don't have to have an LLC. Typically, the LLC is beneficial if you have active income in terms of real estate. So, common examples is like you're a realtor, you're a broker, mortgage officer, if you're a syndicator, raising money for real estate deals. So those are examples where, being inside of a corporation, for example, could get you better tax benefits. But even then, it's not with respect to write-offs because we can always write off similar things. It's more in terms of like different tax rates in what you're saving when it comes to like active income.
That's kind of the common theme, but there's so much people, like you said, on social media. I hear it a lot too. And a lot of people are like, oh, I want to start an LLC, or how do I start an LLC so I can get all these tax benefits? But thanks for clearing that up a little bit. Let's see
Yeah,
what
and I
else.
think, I was going to say it's really hard too because I don't know the origin of this, but there are just often times where attorneys will recommend a lot of different entities. And I think, from that perspective, I think, most of the time legal counsel is going to get you set up so that you're having the most protection, right? And so some of that could mean like, hey, you have 5 rental properties, we might need 6 entities. We'll have one LLC each, you have a holding one, then have a management company. And although that's really great for liability, right, if that's what your attorney recommends, it's also really important to consider the cost benefit analysis, because if you're a newer investor and you have, not much cash flow, not much equity, and then you have to weigh that against the cost of the legal fee to form all the entities. And like you were saying, maybe forming entities is the easy part, like buying real estate. Now that it's formed, what are we going to do with all the accounting and the bookkeeping and the tax filing, right? So it's having like more of a comprehensive look at everything, because at the end of the day, real estate investing is like any other business. So we have to make our decisions by looking at cost benefit of everything we do.
Yeah, you just touched on a sore subject for me about setting up the structures and everything. And I went down that path. And like you say, if everything is set up properly, you have this business running, income flowing in, reserves, and yeah, it's a lot easier to kind of set this structure up. But like in the beginning, you may not have a lot of cash flow, or you got to pay for expenses. And now you got to figure out, how am I going to pay for this? How do I not commingle funds? How do I keep, like there's extra fees with the entities. And yeah, so I'm dealing with that right now. And unfortunately, of all the places that like I invested in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So Pennsylvania has one of the higher transfer title fees. So for me, I can't just easily, put multiple properties into one entity. So yeah, that's a great point right there, to kind of, maybe it's better to step back, just get things situated, and then kind of go down that asset protection route. But yeah, that was a sore subject for me. Yeah.
Yeah, and it is for many investors. I think, if you own rental real estate already, then it's okay. It's a little bit of a cost, but I really hate seeing it where, my team, we sometimes meet people at some of these conferences, and they're like, hey, I've got 5 entities, and come to find out they don't actually own any real estate yet. Like, this is set up to do this, and this is set up to flip land. And so it's like, oh man, all that money, I wish you would have just spent it on a rental property or something.
And I think part of the problem I see is it actually prevents people from getting started. So I had a call with someone, and they're like, yeah, I'm trying to get my entity set up. I'm trying to get all of this formation. And like you said, they don't own anything yet. And it's like, but that's what's holding them up before they make that first purchase, is they're trying to get this whole entity structure set up. Yeah, so that, yeah, I see that often, where it's the structure that they're waiting on, and they're not even purchasing anything yet. So
Yeah. Or people are like, hey, I'm trying to figure out, I'm delaying my investment process because I'm trying to figure out the ideal name for my
yeah,
LLC. We've heard that before. It's like, hey, you
yeah,
can always change your name. You can do a
yeah.
DBA. That's not the most important part of, the business process.
Yeah, getting the property, that's the most
Yes.
important part, having real estate.
Right.
But yeah, so well, I love that. So let's see, what now. What real estate investor like tax book would you recommend for people to read?
Well, obviously my book. So my husband and I wrote a book published by Bigger Pockets. It's called Tax Strategies for the Savvy Real Estate Investor. And it's written in story format. So every chapter is its own standalone story. And we talk about it's a compilation of basically client stories, examples of how strategies are implemented correctly, and you get tax savings, and also some nightmare stories, kind of like some of these that you and I are chatting about that we see. So it's a pretty quick read for anyone who wants to learn about tax strategies for the average investor. So the book is not designed for CPAs. For those of you who are CPAs listening in, it's not designed with like tax codes and things like that. But one of my favorite authors is actually Diane Kennedy. So back in the days, she was Robert Kiyosaki's original CPA. And so she had written a book also on tax loopholes. It's called Tax Loopholes of the Rich. And that's a really good one to read as well. And she uses a lot of examples about, how to use some of these loopholes. Otherwise, we call them incentives now, right? But it's kind of the same thing. Basically, how to use the tax code to your advantage.
I'm curious though. You kind of touched on, reading Rich Dad Poor Dad book in the beginning of your journey. When you read it, did it resonate with you? Did it make a lot of sense? Because when I first read it, I just didn't agree with it because I was like, I was always told that my home is an asset. And the book didn't make sense to me. And then I read like 20 years later, I'm like, oh man, I wish I started a lot sooner. But yeah, it didn't make sense to me in the beginning.
Oh, I love that. So that's really interesting. I think for me, it really resonated a lot because, in his book, he had two dads, right? The rich dad and the poor dad. For me, I actually also had rich dad, poor dad, but it was one and the same person. So my dad was very entrepreneurial, and my grandparents were always business owners. So I come from a family of entrepreneurs, but my parents always raised me to get good grades, go to good school, get a steady job. And so when I read that book, it was kind of interesting. I was like, oh, wow, I also had rich dad, poor dad, but it was kind of just like the same person who tried to, kind of steer me down the traditional route of getting a career and things like that. But yeah, I think it resonated with me also a lot because his co-author of that book, who's Sharon Lecter, who's also a CPA. So a lot of the concepts they present are kind of in accounting terms, the whole assets and liabilities. So that was probably like easier for me to digest because it was part of what I did day to day. But it was interesting that you said that, it didn't resonate as much with you.
Well, I actually have an accounting degree, so maybe that's my bad. I have an accounting degree. I read that book and it just didn't make sense to me at the time. But yeah, I wish I started a lot sooner. But right now I want to give you a little bit of chance to do a selfless promotion, like how people can connect with you, like what services you offer. But where can they reach you at?
The best place to find me in terms of like tax planning services is our website. That's keystonecpa.com. We have a lot of great resources there. And if you go on there, there's actually a free downloadable tax savings toolkit. And it has a lot of strategies about like how do you pay your kids and take a tax deduction? What kind of entity is best for my real estate? So we kind of go a little bit more in depth about some of those things. And then we also have a self-assessment tool. People are always asking me like, hey, Amanda, am I overpaying in taxes? And unfortunately, it's not something that I can answer real quickly, but we created this tool. So it's a compilation of, I think, maybe like 10 questions that you ask yourself. And depending on the answer, it'll give you a grade in terms of like, what is your risk profile in overpaying taxes right now? So that would be the best place to kind of download all that freebie information. If you're someone who just want like tidbits of daily tax tips or what I'm eating every day as a foodie, you can follow me on social media. I'm mostly on Instagram as Amanda Han CPA.
Yeah, reach out to her. I'm going to have to schedule a call and see if I can clean up the mess that I've started already. But so, before we finish up, what would you say? I mean, recently, I guess, what would be the most recent foodie picture you have on your social media?
Oh man, well, my family, we went on an Asia trip this past year. It was the first time that my kids have been to Asia. So we were in China for 2 weeks and Taiwan for a week. And yeah, that was just like foodie heaven because every single meal has been really amazing. And I was actually telling my friends, here when we go to amusement parks, they're not really known for great food typically. But over there, when I went to Universal Studios in Beijing, it's like even the amusement food park was really amazing. Like some of the dumplings and stuff like that tasted awesome.
How old are your kids? Sorry.
I have a 4 and 11-year-old.
Okay. And so are they picky? Like, do they kind of explore and try these different foods or is it?
Yeah, they're a little bit different. My older one is my older one likes more like is more open, I guess, to trying different foods. My younger one is not as open. Maybe his palate is, not as developed
Yeah.
yet.
My son is 8 and yeah, it's a struggle to have him try anything new. Yeah, it's hard even for school lunch, man. I just like trying to figure out what are you going to eat today, but it's a challenge nowadays.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. So you have to pack lunch every day, is what you're telling me.
Yeah, I mean, I have money in the funds for the school lunch, but maybe if it's pizza for the day, he'll have it. But
Yeah.
other than that, I don't think he'll try anything else for school lunch. So. Yeah.
Hopefully, in a couple of years, the palette will be more
Hopefully, yeah.
accepting of
Yeah.
flavors.
Okay. Well, thanks for, before we go, I have one final question for you. As you can see, the superheroes in the background. My son loves superheroes. Avengers is like number one, his favorite. But for you, what superpower do you think you have that helps you in, maybe tax field or even real estate investing?
Gosh, my superpower, I think it's for me, I feel like it's a combination, of my specialty in real estate taxes, but also maybe just as importantly, the ability to explain some of the concepts and strategies to people who aren't CPAs and accountants. And I think that's important because as an everyday investor, people really need to understand what the benefits are and how to do it in a simplified manner so that they'll actually do it. And I think a lot of CPAs, unfortunately, talk too in depth or too much, accounting speak, where it confuses and kind of scares away some of our investor friends.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think that, like you're saying, that's part of the reason why maybe some people don't reach out to their tax person more regularly because they feel like, a lot of this stuff is just going over their head. But yeah, if you keep it simple, it's super helpful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Amanda, thank you for taking time again. I love this. Is great information. I'm going to have to reach out to you, like I said, and we're going to have to try and figure out the mess that I started. But we'll do this again.
Awesome. Thank
Okay.
you for having
Thank
me.
you. Bye bye.